Hey guys, Hidden Truths here. Welcome to this new video with a bunch of new stories. I'm trying to hit 10,000 subscribers and I think we can do it with your help. So please subscribe. It would honestly mean a lot to me. Now, let's get right into the stories.
The morning after their wedding tasted like citrus and cake, sweet and bright and a little sticky where the frosting had smudged the box in the hotel mini-fridge. Nora stood barefoot on the balcony, the city just waking, traffic rinsing the streets with soft noise. She felt newly named and slightly off balance, as if a familiar song had changed key and invited her to learn its harmony. Evan's arm draped over her waist when he joined her there, his cheek stubbled and warm, and the promise of the day sat between them like a folded blanket. Marriage, she thought, was a long walk they'd share, new shoes, a hand to hold, room enough for both sets of footsteps. The first small sign arrived disguised as courtesy. Marta, Evan's mother, pressed a congratulatory hug into Nora's shoulders at their post-wedding brunch and, without anyone asking, also pressed a slender silver key into Evan's palm. "For emergencies," she said. It was the same shape as their buildings, though no one had given it to her. Marta's purse was a small museum of necessary items, measuring tape, breath mints, a pen with the church's name, and apparently this extra key. She smiled widely, brave lipstick, eyes bright with the practiced cheer of a woman who had lit her own candles for a long time. At home, Nora found 2 boxes stacked in the hallway, brown and inoffensive, like temporary guests waiting for a ride. "Just some winter things from Mom's," Evan said, easing past with his laptop bag. "She needed a place till she clears her storage." He tucked them against the wall where the coats breathed their faint detergent scent and left them there, labeled in Marta's tidy, resolute hand, serving dishes and holiday lights. It took less than a week for the group chat to sprout like ivy along Nora's phone screen. The chat had started for wedding details and never quite dissolved. Its name was cheerful and misleading, Hail Fam, joined by Marta's friends who sent wings and heart reactions, by Evan's aunt who posted recipe links at odd hours. Nora scrolled while stirring a pot of soup, noticing the little decisions that had grown wings and flown without her. Where to meet for Sunday dinner. Whether to choose the blue paint sample for the guest room. "The sunlight in your place runs cool," Marta typed, "the blue will warm it." Evan posted a thumbs up. Nora found herself laughing softly, bewildered rather than wounded, as if she'd stumbled mid-scene into a play everyone else had rehearsed. She liked Marta. She liked her brisk competence, her habit of carrying napkins in her pocket like a magician who could conjure paper from the air. Still, the choices felt like a river tying knots around Nora's ankles. Nothing hurt yet, but the water pulled. She adjusted where she could. She set the table the way she liked, forks on the left, napkins folded into simple rectangles instead of the little triangles Marta preferred. She kept her own budget spreadsheet, color-coded in soft pastels, because colors helped her see calm inside the numbers. When Evan asked if his mother could come with them to look at cribs, "She knows sturdy construction," he said. Nora smiled and said yes, and watched the salesperson naturally direct answers toward Marta's steady gaze. It wasn't cruel, it was gravitational. People tended to orbit confidence. On the second Sunday in their new routine, Nora burned the roasted carrots. The house smelled faintly sweet and charred, and the smoke detector scolded with a chirp. She cracked the window and laughed it off, but her nerves were jittered eggs. When she opened the fridge for something else to serve, a sheet of paper stared back at her from under a magnet, the church picnic magnet, the one with a smiling lamb. The paper was crisp, laser-printed, a grid of months and categories. It was titled Budget, Q3, and the columns were familiar in a way that unsettled her. Marta's format, not hers, the headings bolded in the same places, the adjustments written in blue pen that wasn't either of their pens. Nora touched the page without taking it down. The ink had smudged near groceries, like someone had brushed it with a damp thumb while straightening it. In the margin, a tiny star noted price check at Sam's. The digits trailing rent and utilities, winter, were reasonable. Even kind. But they were theirs, hers and Evan's, and here they were, annotated by another hand. She pictured the silver key glinting in Marta's purse, the boxes in the hallway that still waited with patient labels, and the family chat pinging somewhere with a suggestion about plants that purify air. The carrots cooled on the counter, still salvageable with a squeeze of lemon. Evan's footsteps sounded behind her, the rhythm of a man in a house he thought was safe. "New plan," he said gently, peering at the paper. He meant the budget, but his voice landed in a wider room. She folded her own voice around calm, because calm felt like choosing her way through fog. "Looks like it," she said, not unkindly, and let her finger rest on the smudged month. Her silence, careful and exact, asked a question he didn't yet know how to answer. Outside the open window a siren threaded past, and the magnet clicked softly as if the lamb were agreeing with the grid. Nora stood there until the soup simmered too low and the smell of onion went sweet, and she realized that something quiet had entered their home without knocking, sat down at the table, and pulled out a chair as if it had always belonged. She could not tell yet whether it meant to help them or to crowd them, only that it had a steady pulse and a pen with good ink. She lifted the magnet. The page didn't fall. It clung stubbornly, like a reminder stitched into fabric. She breathed in, steadying herself, and reached up to peel it free. The front door opened before she could, and keys chimed, more than one set, ring against ring, as if the house were clearing its throat to speak. Nora froze, her fingers grazing savings, and looked toward the hallway where the boxes waited like witnesses. Nora learned the sensation of being rerouted in increments so small they resembled kindness. The first holiday as husband and wife approached like a warm front, and she imagined their table with a modest bloom of marigolds, her grandmother's pie recipe folded in a cookbook like a prayer. Then the Hail Fam chat tipped the map. Marta proposed, with cheer and emojis that looked like confetti, that everyone meet at her place because the oven runs true, and Uncle Vince needed a stare-free entry. Evan replied that it made sense. Nora agreed because it did, because she liked Marta's roast with the rosemary that broke between her fingers, because saying yes felt like cooperation rather than surrender. Still, when she tucked away the untouched bag of marigolds, she felt a little winded, like she'd run for a bus and watched it pull away just as she arrived. Baby talk emerged not as announcement but as climate. They were hoping, not counting, and yet the world thought in names and quilts. One evening, after she turned off the lamp and lay in the gentle glow of the streetlight printing a ladder of light across their ceiling, Nora whispered possibilities to herself, names with round vowels, names that could be whispered at 2 a.m., and still sound like tenderness. In the morning, the chat suggested a family name from Marta's side, solid, dignified, a name that had anchored accounting ledgers and Sunday school rosters. "It carries blessing," Marta wrote. Nora sipped coffee, tasting citrus where there wasn't any, and thought, "I want our child to carry delight before blessing." She typed nothing. Later, at the grocery store, she stood a long time by the pears and practiced saying both names under her breath, the sharp one and the soft, as if she were fitting hats to a future head. They picked a couch together and then unpicked it. Nora had loved it in the store, a comfortable slate with brushed fabric that felt like a good sweater. She pictured naps, the kind that ribboned from daylight into dinner. A week later, while Nora folded laundry and fed the washer another scoop of powder, the couch went back. The delivery slip flapped slightly at the corner in the draft by the door. "Mom says the weave on that one pills," Evan said, almost apologetic, holding his phone as if it were the fragile thing. He added, "She knows fabrics." He said it not to diminish Nora but to elevate expert knowledge, as if the house were a ship that required charts and lighthouses. Nora rubbed a thumb over the soft shoulder seam of one of Evan's t-shirts, felt the quiet of the hallway with its stacked boxes, and nodded. The replacement couch arrived 2 days later. It was firmer, the color truer under their indifferent apartment light, and smelled faintly of plastic and factory dust. She sat on it anyway, letting it learn her shape. The pediatrician was decided with that same gentle inevitability. She and Evan had bookmarked 3 options. She liked the one with a website that used patient explanations, bright drawings of ear canals and lungs, and a video of a doctor laughing with a baby. Then Marta mentioned a doctor from her church. "We'll be among family there," she wrote, and within an afternoon the appointment existed in Evan's calendar, his thumb pressing a blue dot that belonged to an office across town. Nora wanted to object and didn't, partly because the doctor's degrees stacked nicely on her bio, partly because the word family had a gravity that pulled on all of them. To understand Evan was to understand that he had learned fear and devotion as a pair. Nora saw it when he caught a whiff of burnt toast and went to check the smoke detector battery, when he double-knotted his shoes before crossing a busy street, when he smoothed a bill on the counter and paid it the day it arrived. His father had died when Evan was 12, a winter with thin sunlight and a furnace that coughed. It was Evan who learned to call the utility company, who memorized his mother's social security number because the woman on the phone assumed he was an adult. He translated bills the way other kids translated algebra, leaning over the table while Marta, with hands still damp from washing other people's office mugs at the building where she cleaned by night, sat beside him and learned the new language of their survival. One night, when the scholarship letter came, Evan found her asleep at the table with the envelope open, her cheek creased by the paper's edge. He became fluent in comfort because he had watched what it cost to earn it. Loyalty wasn't a choice, it was breath. Nora knew that history the way one knows the script of a well-told story and still feels surprised at the end. She did not want to pry loyalty from his hands. She wanted to make space for her own. After the couch exchange and the pediatrician appointment, after another holiday plan shifted on its hinges, she opened her laptop and wrote out a few gentle questions for them to hold together. Could they choose 2 days a week when their home belonged just to their small family? Could the group chat be for news, not decisions? Could keys be for emergencies and emergencies be defined? She phrased each as shared hope instead of rule, and when she read them out loud to herself, they sounded like invitations to clarity rather than a barricade. She asked Evan to sit with her Saturday afternoon. He looked up from fixing a cabinet hinge, his hands smelling faintly of cedar from the tool drawer, and said yes with a relief she hadn't expected, as if he'd been wanting the conversation and hadn't known how to request it. She marked the time on the calendar with a small blue dot and a note, "Talk, tea," and imagined a tray with slices of lemon and a bowl for the used tea bags. She breathed easier the rest of the week, a woman who had packed for a trip and knew where her passport was. On Friday night, the group chat pinged with a cheerful crisis. Marta's stove had died mid-simmer, a clogged igniter or a tired soul, and the delivery window for the new appliance had landed on Saturday afternoon. "They can only come then," she typed, "and they need someone there to sign." Evan's reply appeared almost at once, reflex as much as love. "I'll be there," he wrote. He walked to Nora, the house suddenly full of the soft beep of a calendar adjusting, and said, gently, "Could we move our talk? Just a bit?" The lemon she had imagined clinked against an empty glass in her mind, and the blue dot on the calendar seemed to slide, unanchored, toward a different hour. The first holiday season came with a decision that should have been simple: Thanksgiving at her sister's in Asheville, or hosting in their own kitchen, which Nora had painted the soft gold she'd always imagined for holidays. She'd made lists, even picked out the linens. But one evening, Evan came home with the news already settled. Marta had a turkey in the freezer that needs using, and had told the family they'd all meet at her house instead. It was presented as a kindness: no one had to travel, Marta had more seating. Nora tried to hide her disappointment, but the words "we already told everyone" settled like a stone in her chest. She went anyway, carrying her sister's pecan pie, feeling like a guest who had brought the wrong thing. The changes came in small, harmless-seeming turns. The baby name they'd whispered to each other in bed, Evan's grandmother's name for a girl, was replaced after Marta worried kids would tease. When their couch arrived, Nora loved its quiet moss green, but 3 days later, Evan returned it, citing a sale Marta had found on a more stain-resistant model. The replacement was practical, durable, and the exact beige of hospital walls. She tried to shake it off, to tell herself it was help. But then came the pediatrician. They had an appointment booked with a well-reviewed doctor Nora had researched and felt comfortable with. 2 days before the visit, Evan called her from work, Mom says Dr. Turner from her church is amazing, she got us in there instead. Nora had stood in the kitchen with the phone still in her hand, the list of questions she'd written now useless. She didn't mind meeting Dr. Turner. But the way the decision had happened, without her, felt like a faint erasure, as if she were watching her own handwriting fade from a page. It wasn't that Evan didn't love her, she never doubted that. There were moments she caught him watching her with the same gentle focus he'd had when they first met at the campus coffee shop, when she'd spilled her tea and he'd wordlessly passed over every napkin in sight. But there was a weight in him too, a kind of automatic obedience when Marta spoke, that Nora had never encountered in another adult. Once, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Evan had told her about the winter he turned 12. His father had died suddenly that spring, and Marta, still learning how to breathe without him, had sat at the kitchen table night after night with a stack of unpaid bills. Evan had been the one to open the envelopes, read the words aloud, try to decipher the fees and threats. He'd learned which utilities could go unpaid the longest before they shut off, how to make minimum due sound less frightening. Some nights, he'd said, she'd just put her hand on my arm when I read a small number. I guess I learned pretty early how to take care of her. It explained so much, the quick way he leapt to her aid, the way his voice softened when she asked something, the loyalty stitched into him like thread in a quilt. But it didn't make it easier when that loyalty kept rerouting their lives. By the time Nora decided she couldn't just hope it would change, there were dozens of these moments stacked in her like books she'd meant to return to the library. She scheduled a talk for a Tuesday night, once the baby was asleep, a chance to say plainly that they needed boundaries. She even made tea and set the mugs on the table before he came home. But he walked in carrying a box. Mom's new dishwasher got delivered early, they called while she was at work. I said I'd help her install it tonight. The tea went cold. The mug stayed full. And Nora sat alone at the table with her words still in her throat, wondering how many more postponements a marriage could survive before the conversation was no longer worth having. The following weekend, while folding laundry, she found herself smoothing the creases from Evan's shirts with more care than necessary. It was an old habit, making something look perfect because she couldn't make it feel perfect. From the living room, she could hear the faint echo of Marta's voice on speakerphone, the two of them talking about some sale on cookware. Nora pressed her palm to the warm cotton, holding it there as if the heat might spread up her arm and give her the resolve she'd been missing. The holiday tablecloth she'd bought was still in its package. She wondered if she should return it before it went out of season. That night, she dreamed she was setting a table for 3, but the third chair was always occupied before she could decide who would sit in it. Sometimes it was Marta, sometimes a shadow she couldn't name. In the dream, she kept pouring water into glasses, only to find them already full. When she woke, Evan was asleep beside her, one arm draped across her waist. She stared at the ceiling, thinking not about the dream, but about how, in real life, that third chair never seemed to get pushed back under the table. Nora began with paper. She always had, lists for groceries, calendars taped inside cupboard doors, sketches for furniture arrangements no one else could picture until they were in place. This time, the page was larger, and the stakes felt different. She wrote at the top in her slanted script, "Our boundaries." Below, she broke it into 3 neat sections. Home access, keys for emergencies only. Emergencies to be clearly defined. Decision-making, group chat for updates, not decisions. Big choices made together first. Time, 2 days a week that belong just to their household. No visits, no errands for others. She read it aloud to herself in the still kitchen, her voice careful and low, as if speaking too loudly might scare the plan away. It sounded fair. Reasonable. She even imagined Marta nodding if it were phrased right, maybe with a gentle preface about wanting everyone to feel comfortable. When she showed Evan the list, he rubbed the back of his neck, the way he did when something wasn't an outright no, but also not easy to say yes to. "I get it," he said, eyes scanning the lines. I don't want her to think we're shutting her out. "We're not," Nora said, trying to keep the urgency out of her voice. "We're making room for us." He nodded, but his gaze kept drifting. She recognized the flicker, the calculation of how this would land on Marta, the way his loyalty braced before the impact of even imagined hurt. That night, they drove to Marta's with a casserole and the printed list folded in his pocket. Nora imagined him taking it out, explaining their hopes, everyone leaving with more clarity than they'd had before. Instead, the conversation swerved. Marta was seated at the kitchen table, papers spread out before her like a card game. She looked up, smiling but tired. "Don't fuss over me," she said when Evan asked about the doctor's appointment. Then, in the same breath, she told them about the little scare she'd had, nothing dramatic, just a series of dizzy spells. Tests had been run, results pending. The room felt smaller. Evan sat down beside her, listening intently as she recounted the past few weeks, his hand over hers. Nora listened too, the folded list in her pocket now feeling like something dangerous, a flare you couldn't light in a room filled with gas. When Marta's story wandered into memory, it was the kind Evan had told Nora in pieces, how he'd gotten his college scholarship. The official version was about grades and perseverance. The real one was about a mother cleaning office kitchens at night, tucking $20 bills into an envelope marked books, and pretending the envelope was just a little help, when in truth it was the difference between possibility and its absence. By the time they left, the casserole dish was empty and the folded list had never emerged from Evan's pocket. In the car, Nora stared at the windshield wipers beating away a drizzle, wondering if love always meant forfeiting the moment to speak. 2 days later, she was at her desk when her phone buzzed with a notification, motion detected, foyer cam. Her first thought was that she'd been hacked. They didn't have a foyer camera. But when she opened the app, apparently installed to her phone via a shared email account, she saw a small, grainy view of their front door. The timestamp read 11:04 p.m., and the clip showed a shadow moving across the mat. A moment later, Marta's familiar outline appeared, leaning down to retrieve something from the floor, a package, maybe, before letting herself in with the silver key. Nora watched, frozen. Marta's face was kind, tired. She carried the box inside, set it against the wall, locked the door behind her. Then she walked out of frame, the camera's lens catching only the soft beep of the lock and the faint creak of the floor. The package was indeed by the wall when Nora got home that night, unopened, a neat note in Marta's handwriting taped to it, "Left this safe inside for you. Love, M." It wasn't the package that unsettled Nora. It was the camera, our foyer, she thought, our threshold, now wired into someone else's watchful devices. The third chair, she realized, didn't always sit at the table. Sometimes it waited at the door, with a key and a camera lens, deciding when to come in. She brought it up that night. "There's a camera in our foyer," she said, trying to keep her voice from sounding accusatory. Evan looked up sharply. "Oh, Mom mentioned wanting to keep an eye out for packages. Said she'd cover the cost." "I didn't think," he stopped, seeing something in Nora's expression that made his own soften. "You're right. I should have asked." Nora nodded, though the weight in her chest didn't shift. Asking would have been better, yes. But it wouldn't have changed the fact that the camera had already been installed, quietly, without them even noticing until it blinked to life. That night, she dreamed of their home again. In this version, the third chair wasn't in the dining room, it was outside the front door, facing in. Every time Nora tried to close the door, it simply shifted forward, leg by leg, until it was back in the same spot. When she woke, Evan was already up, the faint smell of coffee in the air. On the counter sat the casserole dish, clean and wrapped, Marta's note folded neatly beside it. And there, in the quiet kitchen light, the folded list from her pocket, creased, worn, waited where she'd left it, still unread. It happened on a Tuesday night that bled into Wednesday morning. Their toddler's cry came sharp and unsteady from the nursery, a sound that made Nora's body move before her mind fully woke. She crossed the hall barefoot, the carpet cool under her feet, and found flushed cheeks, hot skin, and a forehead that read 102. 1 on the thermometer. Evan appeared in the doorway, hair mussed, voice low. "I'll get water," he said, already turning toward the kitchen. Nora stroked their child's back, murmuring the same small comfort words her mother had used, even as she reached for her phone to call the pediatrician's after-hours line. The nurse's voice on the other end was calm, measured. "Tylenol, fluids, rest. Watch for anything over 104. Nora thanked her, feeling steadier with a plan. She was just turning back toward the nursery when the sound of a key in the lock cut through the quiet. The door opened, letting in a gust of colder air and the quick, purposeful steps of Marta. She was still in her coat, scarf loose, eyes sharp with worry. "I saw the camera alert," she said, brushing past the foyer before Nora could speak. "I knew something was wrong." Nora's mouth was halfway to "we've got it under control" when Marta was already in the nursery, her hand on the baby's forehead. "Oh, burning up," she murmured, turning to her bag and pulling out a small bottle of an herbal syrup. This always brought Evan's fever down. Nora hesitated. The nurse. "It's natural," Marta said, measuring out a spoonful with practiced hands. Evan came back into the room then, water in one hand, his face caught between relief and uncertainty. "Mom," he started, but the sight of the syrup in her hand seemed to flick a switch in him. His voice softened. "Is it safe with the Tylenol?" "I'll skip the Tylenol for now," Marta said, as if the decision had already been made. She looked at her son, not at Nora, and in that moment Nora felt her own role dissolve to something spectral, like she was in the room but not in the frame. The baby swallowed the syrup without protest. Marta stayed for another hour, sitting in the rocking chair, her foot keeping a steady rhythm on the floor. When she finally left, she kissed Evan on the cheek, touched Nora's arm in passing, and said, "You'll call if it gets worse." After the door closed, the apartment felt strangely hollow. Nora moved through the kitchen, gathering mugs to wash just for something to do. She wanted to be furious, to let the sharpness rise and carry her words, but instead she felt only a bone-deep weariness. Evan stood at the sink beside her. "She means well," he said quietly. "I know," Nora answered. And she did. That was the problem, it was so much easier to fight what was malicious than what was earnest. But she couldn't shake the image of herself in the nursery doorway, watching decisions happen as if she weren't the child's mother. The next afternoon, while Evan was at work and the baby napping, Nora packed a small overnight bag. Not much, just a change of clothes, her phone charger, and the novel she'd been meaning to start for months. She left a note on the counter, her handwriting steady, "Please choose our home." Her friend Marissa answered the door before the second knock. "You okay?" she asked. Nora smiled faintly. "Just need some air." At Marissa's apartment, she slept on the couch, the hum of the refrigerator and the dim orange glow from the street lamp outside wrapping her in a kind of quiet she hadn't realized she'd been craving. She didn't text Evan that night, and he didn't call, though she imagined him walking into their apartment, seeing the note, reading it twice. He woke alone for the first time in years, the note still on the counter, the third chair at the table empty. He made coffee but didn't drink it, the kitchen too quiet without the soft clatter of Nora's morning movements. By mid-morning, he was driving toward his mother's house, the folded note in his jacket pocket. He knew it wasn't a threat, it was an ask. And he also knew that answering it meant finally telling Marta something he'd been avoiding for most of his adult life, that loving her and choosing his marriage were not opposites, but they couldn't occupy the same unbounded space. In his mind, he could still hear Nora's voice from their early days, telling him she liked how he always listened before he spoke. He wanted her to still believe that was true. The road curved, and his mother's house came into view, the porch light still on against the gray daylight. He parked, sat for a moment in the car, and closed his hand around the note as if it were both a map and a promise. The porch boards creaked under his shoes. Marta opened the door before he knocked, her sweater sleeves pushed to the elbows, a faint smell of cinnamon trailing from the kitchen. "You didn't say you were coming," she said, but she was already stepping back to let him in. "I needed to talk," Evan said. His voice was steady, but there was a weight under it. She led him to the kitchen table, where 2 mugs sat waiting as if she'd known he would. The cinnamon was from a loaf cooling on the counter, its crust shiny in the morning light. They talked for a long time, the way they hadn't in years. He told her about Nora's note, about the feeling of coming home to an apartment that felt too quiet and too empty. About the ways he'd let small choices bypass his marriage, not because he didn't love his wife, but because it felt like he was protecting his mother. "I don't want you to think this is less love," he said carefully. "It's just, different love. Love with boundaries." Marta looked down at her hands, fingers twisting once before they stilled. "When your father died, I was sure everyone would forget us," she said. "I didn't realize that in keeping you close, I might be keeping you from everything else." "You didn't keep me from it," he said. "I just didn't know how to choose both." They found a middle space. Marta handed him the spare keys from her purse without being asked. She agreed the foyer camera could go, and when he suggested moving the family group chat to an updates channel, she smiled faintly. "Fewer messages for me to keep up with," she said, and he heard the truth in it. Maybe it was a relief for her, too. That evening, Nora came home to find the foyer camera gone, a small square of cleaner paint marking where it had been. On the counter sat the silver key, now looped on its own ring. Evan was at the table, his hands wrapped around a mug. "I went to see Mom," he said simply. "We made some changes." They had a family meeting that Sunday, just the 3 of them. It wasn't dramatic. No speeches, no accusations. Evan explained the new boundaries, scheduled visits, a shared calendar for all 3 of them, and financial decisions left to the 2 who lived in the apartment. Marta listened, asked 1 or 2 clarifying questions, and nodded. When Nora offered her tea, she accepted, stirring it slowly before saying, "I want you 2 to have your home. I'll come when I'm invited." It was the most unforced sentence Nora had heard in months. Weeks passed, and the changes held. Marta still called, but now she asked, "When's a good time?" before dropping by. The group chat filled with photos and recipes, not instructions. The spare keys stayed on the hook by the door, untouched. One Sunday afternoon, Marta actually knocked, before stepping inside with a pie. Nora was setting the table, and there were 3 plates, but the 3rd was placed without tension, without the sense of a permanent seat. They ate together, laughter rising easily between bites, and when Marta left, she kissed them both on the cheek and said, "See you next week." After the door closed, Evan took Nora's hand. The apartment felt quiet in the best way, still theirs, but not walled off. Later, as sunlight thinned across the living room, Nora looked at the table, the chairs tucked neatly in. She thought about how hard it had been to name what was wrong, and how simple the room looked now that it had been said aloud. Homes don't need fewer rooms, they need doors that close and hearts that open.